Today we're going to talk about Git Worktrees. This was one of the most requested or the most requested features in GitKraken Desktop. So we're excited to recently add support for that. And in this workshop, we're going to talk about how to use it, why you might want to use Worktrees, and all that good stuff so you can start to take advantage of that. To run this session, I'm joined by Trevor, who is a product manager here at GitKraken. He's going to give you a little bit of background on Worktrees and then actually jump into GitKraken Desktop and run through how to use it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to him and we can get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about Git Worktrees. As Ken mentioned, it's been a very highly requested feature in GitKraken Desktops, being able to support Git Worktrees. And this is a great opportunity to show a lot of that work and talk about Worktrees in general, where they may fit in your workflow and some benefits they have in your workflows over other potential Git activity. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what Git Worktrees are, some benefits that Worktrees have, touch on a few common use cases for Worktrees. It's not fully extensive, but main use cases that people use Worktrees for today, and then jump into a demonstration using GitKraken Desktop to manage Worktrees and hop in between GitKraken Desktop and GitLens for VS Code. So if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or use the Q&A panel on the right. So I'll start by talking a little bit about what Git Worktrees are. Essentially, they are independent working directories in Git that allow you to check out multiple branches from the same repository simultaneously. So these working directories are all linked together. That's the main purpose of a worktree, where they're sharing the repository's history and all of the Git data, but there are actually distinct independent working directories where you can have multiple branches checked out simultaneously. So having those isolated directories allows you to work truly in parallel, where you can edit, test, build, and whatever you want on multiple branches without worrying about your main repository's working directory or any other branch that you have checked out. So the main concepts that I think are important to know about Worktrees are, first, these are truly independent working directories. They operate as a standalone directory where you're actually duplicating all of the working directory files that would normally be in your main repository directory, but you're actually duplicating everything that's needed except all of the shared Git data. So this means that if you have your central, if you're using LFS, all of the central LFS storage remains shared. So you're duplicating the pointers. You're not duplicating all of the LFS files, since that is actually stored, in the Git data, but you are duplicating all of the working directory files. And I'll show what that looks like in a little bit. But since you have all of these independent directories, you can truly work in parallel. And so that means that any uncommitted changes that you have in a work tree will stay on that work tree. There's no need to stash and pop to switch branches. You can leave working directory changes there that are uncommitted and come back to it whenever, and it will be untouched. The second concept is that shared repository data. All work trees are linked together for a repository. They share all of the same Git data, so you don't have to worry about duplicating a bunch of redundant data. That also means that if you make changes in a work tree, they're immediately accessible in all other work trees. Since they share the same underlying Git database, if you make a commit in one, it will show up in the other immediately. So again, these are, it's an efficient way to essentially, duplicate your repo and have multiple branches checked out simultaneously. And lastly, I think it's important to talk about how seamless the context switching can be. Worktrees can be easily created in GitKraken Desktop, GitLens for VS Code, and directly from the command line. But they can be short-lived in nature, so it's easy to create them, switch between them, and then delete them without ever having to worry about impacting your main repo. It's a safe place to work, and you can have as many open as you want, really, at any given time, assuming you have the disk space. So, what are some common use cases for worktrees? Well, there's a handful, but some of the ones I wanted to highlight today are PR reviews. So, for example, you can check out and test a remote branch in a separate work tree while keeping your current work intact. So I don't have to stash and switch branches and then switch back and pop them. I can just create a new work tree and check out that remote branch. Related to the pull request, run some tests, go back to my work tree or on my main repo or a separate work tree where I'm doing work, and I can let those tests run maybe in that other work tree, and it's not impacting my current work. Also, parallel development. A lot of times we may be working on multiple tasks at once. So without having to worry about committing unfinished work, stashing and managing, your stashes, I don't have to worry about if my work is ready to commit. If I'm truly working in parallel, I can have multiple work trees and switch between them. If you're using GitKraken Desktop, it's as simple as double clicking on a different work tree, and now I've totally changed my context to a separate working directory where all of my changes in the previous work tree will still be there when I get back. And this will be a little more obvious when we walk through the products. Testing and experimentation, we've seen users often use it to explore historical states in a repository without having to swip branches, again, managing your current work in your current state, or creating new branches on commit, managing detached head states. Like if I wanted to check out a specific commit in my history and run some tests or create a build, I can create a work tree that's pointing to that commit. And I can run builds, I can run tests without affecting my current working directory or main repository. And lastly, isolating environments. So, we run into this a lot internally at GitKraken, but when you're working with builds and, you have build artifacts with maybe different environments you have set up or different states of the repository, each branch will have its dedicated space for builds and those build artifacts. So you can run builds simultaneously. Or, for example, we've recently, GitKraken Desktop has migrated all of our code to TypeScript, having, a different build system and packages and managing those contexts has been really, really easy with worktrees because, with a totally different environment, a separate working directory and file path on disk, it's pretty easy. You just switch between them. You can run your builds and switch back, and you don't have to worry about any artifacts that may collide with changing branches. So I'll pause there. That was kind of a high-level overview of work trees and some use cases. And before I jump into products, let me see if there's any questions in chat, or maybe Ken, you've taken a look.
Yeah, if you hop over to the Q&A, there's one question on how our work tree is different than multiple clones.
Yeah, I think the main difference is that they are linked together with all of the local Git data as well, and you don't have to duplicate any of your Git database. So, for example, when I go through the walkthrough, if I make a commit locally, it will show across all work trees. There's no need to do any repository syncing like pulling and fetching to keep them up to date. And also, I don't need to duplicate all of the Git database, your .git folder with everything linked together. So if you're storing config files, they'll all be synced together. If you're storing, if you're using LFS, again, you don't have to duplicate that as well.
There's another one I'm going to throw up on the screen. Let me know if you can see that, Trevor.
Yep, I can see that. Is there any plans to add some modules to initialize automatically when creating a work tree? Currently, these are not initialized, so creating work tree is kind of broken by default. I'm not quite sure that specific use case. So I see. If you're creating a work tree, you want all of the modules initialized. Yes. So submodules specifically, we have to improve some of the submodule management in GitKraken Desktop with work tree management. Our goal is essentially to make it extremely seamless to switch to the exact same context with all of the setup when you create work trees in GitKraken Desktop, but understanding that some cases like submodule support, and we're working on some improvements to get hooks across work trees as well. That will be supported, but is currently a gap today. Thanks for pointing that
out. So there's a couple other comments, but I think maybe if you get started on walking through it in app, that might answer some of those. So we can come back to questions when you're done.
Awesome. Let's do that. So I'm going to hop over to GitKraken Desktop. And I'm in a repository right now. I just have my main repository. I have no work trees currently. So I'm going to walk through an example of maybe a flow that you would do in GitKraken Desktop where work trees would be beneficial. So I'm on my main repository. Maybe I am going to create a branch to start work. So I'm going to go ahead and create a branch here. I'll call it, my new task. And I may be doing work on this branch. I'll quickly create, maybe I'll edit this file really quickly. And I have this uncommitted change here, my work in progress. Then if I hop over to Launchpad, you can see I have, if you haven't used Launchpad in GitKraken Desktop, it's an amazing tool where you can take a look at all of your pull requests grouped by actionable status. And as you can see here, Launchpad is highlighting this pull request that I need to review. So rather than, if I wanted to pull down those changes to take a look, rather than actually go stash this or get to a point where I can commit this, I can just create a work tree and easily switch to that context of the pull request. So on this pull request, there's an action to check out in a new work tree. And what you'll see happen is we'll jump over to the repository and it'll pre-fill all of this work tree information. When you're making a work tree, there's a few things to consider. If you're making them from scratch, you'll have to input these fields. If you're creating them from pull requests or other branches, GitKraken Desktop will automatically pre-fill these fields with good defaults. But we have a reference to check out where this new work tree branch will be pointing to, and it'll be stored in a working directory. By default, all of your work trees are stored in a folder at the same level as your main repository. And this is so that if, for example, you're opening your repository in your IDE, you don't get a bunch of subdirectories that contain duplicates of your repo. So I will go ahead and create this work tree, and then GitKraken Desktop will ask if I automatically want to open this. So great. So I open this work tree and I can see that I'm on this branch in a separate work tree. I still have down here a reference to my main repository, which has this my new branch checked out. If I switch back to it, I can see that my work in progress is still there. I don't have to worry about dealing with this as I go review this pull request. I can switch back between them with double clicks. So again, if you're working in parallel, this is really easy to switch back and forth and not have to stash and pop every time you want to go back and forth. In addition, in a graph, like if I double clicked on my new task, it'll immediately bring me into the work tree that has that branch checked out. which is my main repository. The main repository is still a work tree. It's the main tree of the repo, and all of these additional work trees are called linked work trees. So you may hear that often in conversation about linked work trees versus the main work tree. That's essentially what's being illustrated here with the home icon versus maybe the tree icon. So I'll switch back to this feature/demo work tree. And one of the things to note is that, when we're duplicating working directories, they're in totally separate file paths and totally separate directories on your system with all the files. So if I wanted to actually take a look at the code and maybe edit certain things, I have to open multiple windows in my IDE, or if your IDE supports linking to multiple paths, you'll need them open in your IDE. But from GitKraken Desktop, for example, if I am using VS Code as my IDE, I can simply, when I have this work tree checked out, I can just open in VS Code. If you haven't used a command palette, it's Command P. You open the command palette. You can access basically every command from command palette, and it'll open VS Code directly into that work tree. So you'll see up here, Explorer Demo 1114. That's the name of the branch. That's also, when you create a work tree, by default, we'll name the directory the name of the branch. Typically, work trees are more ephemeral. So when I'm done with this task, I'll just remove the work tree, which removes that directory. So rarely are you typically going to be checking out different branches within the same work tree. So the directory is named what the branch is when you first check it out. So I'm in this work tree and I can make changes to this repo now in my IDE. So for example, if I wanted to make changes on this work tree, I'll just pick a file and maybe save that. And I can see that I now have working directory changes on this work tree. And again, just illustrating how easy it is to switch back and forth. I have my old changes on my new task here, completely safe. And I can hop back and forth as often as I want. It's very easy to switch context. There's some improvements that we're working on as well, switching between work trees in terms of keeping the context of the main repo present. So up here, you can always take a look at the main repo's name, but we do prioritize the actual work tree branch when we're looking at the breadcrumb here or the tab bar. So switching back to VS Code, if you have GitLens for VS Code installed, which everyone here with a GitKraken subscription, you also get access to pro features of GitLens. So if you're using VS Code, GitLens also does highlight work trees in the source control tab by default. So there's a work tree section that's in this GitLens section you can pull out. And I can, again, have references to my main repository and other work trees in here. Again, since they're totally different file paths and directories, you will need to, in your IDE, it's important where you're actually doing editing. You will have separate windows or separate tabs open to different directories. But since all of the data is linked, all of the GitLens features are aware of the different work tree and the main repository context. Just to prove that sort of workflow, if I wanted to come back here and hop into the My New Task main work tree, where I have this working change, if I open this in VS Code, it'll open a new window, and you can see I have totally separate changes. If I go down, I change this workspaces file, and then if maybe I'll do a little side-by-side here. Oh, there it is. So I'm using separate windows, but you can also just have multiple open in the same IDE window. So you can see here, I can edit both simultaneously. I mean, not like this. That would be pretty wild, but maybe you want to copy some stuff over. And And I can maybe run tests in the terminal. So if I want a new terminal here in this repository, I can run tests while I'm working in the other. So if you have long tests or maybe you're running builds and you want to switch back and do other work, you can do that great with Worktrees. Back in GitKraken Desktop, we also have the terminal here as well. So if you don't even need to open your IDE, but you want context of different work trees, you can use the integrated terminal here and run whatever you need to do between work trees. So I'll pause there and maybe take a look at any questions that folks have. I think overall, what I wanted to illustrate here is the ability to manage multiple branches at once without, really, I guess, needing to think about your current environment and the changes that you have on that branch. So work trees are great to work simultaneously across multiple branches, whether that's for viewing PRs, working on multiple tasks. Say you have a feature branch, but you need to put out a hotfix really quickly and work on a bug. You can create a new work tree and work on those bugs and switch back and forth with your current tasks pretty easily. Awesome. Any questions? Ken, I see a lot in chat. Should I go to Q&A tab first?
I'll throw one up here. I think you answered this, but just for completeness, we'll throw it up here. Let me know if you can see that, Trevor.
Yeah, switching context to a different work tree. It's a different file path on disk. So we would need to have a different Visual Studio open to make sure we are that's correct. Yeah. So they're totally separate file paths and working directories. Although the Git data is linked, if you're making changes and editing in Visual Studio or otherwise, you'll need separate windows or tabs open to each work tree. That's correct.
Just another one about cloning versus work trees again. Just if you can run through kind of the advantages of using work trees.
Yeah, so it looks like you have like a dev version, a beta version. So, it depends on, I guess, if you are using them, if they have the same configuration, and you'd have to think about essentially if they all shared the same repository database, would that be efficient? So if there are totally separate environments and they're set up with different configurations, maybe cloning is better. But if you're changing the environments by, maybe cherry picking some specific changes or applying some patch, work trees, again, the advantage there is you can easily switch between them and know that all of the data across your work trees are being shared together. So again, if I made this commit, and I'm sharing my screen now on my new branch, my new task branch, and I stage the changes and make a commit. If I switch to this other work tree, that commit is already shared. The local commit is already shared, and all of the history is immediately up to date. So, depend on how that environment is set up, but when you really want to share all of the history and data immediately, I think work trees are much quicker and more efficient.
One more question here, and then I think we just have some product feedback, which we will definitely share with Trevor and the team.
Awesome. When you have both work trees open in GitKraken at the same time, you can, we are adding the ability to make it a little bit easier to do that. But since they are separate working directories, you can actually just, I wanted to go to the new tab and maybe open, I believe this is it. I can have the main work tree open while I have this other linked work tree open in separate tabs in GKD. So you can manually browse to the path of the other work trees and open them on GK desktop, but we will be adding the ability to just, for example, open this in a new tab. This is mainly built initially to easily switch the context to do Git actions on. So like switching back and forth within the same tab. But it's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up.
And one final one that popped through, if someone's not seeing it on the left side, besides making sure they're on the latest version, anything else they should be thinking of?
Yeah, one way to check, if you hover over any of the left panel section headers, you can right click and, some are hidden by default depending on the repo. So for example, if your repository has no GitHub Actions or submodules, it's hidden by default, but you can always manually unhide them by doing that. If you see it and you want it to show up, or if you don't see it, it'll also show up by just creating a work tree, which you can do off of any branch you currently have by right-clicking and going create work tree from that branch. So I can also do this in the graph and create a work tree directly from any branch. And then it'll ask if I want to open it, and I can switch to that work tree. So that'll force that section visible as well. Good question. Thank you.
All right. I think that's it. Right on time, too. As I mentioned, we did see there was a couple of product feedback items, which thank you for sharing those. We'll definitely take a look at that. But thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Trevor, for walking us through work trees. And for all of you in the US, have a great Thanksgiving. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.